possibilities and then investigate whether all these possibilities were in fact implemented in the languages of the world, and after a while you discovered that some possibilities were not realized. So one of the examples that is quoted in this long passage is that if you think about pronouns and how they distinguish genders, you know some languages will have he and she. So you will distinguish between males and females in the third person singular. You may assume that there may be gender distinctions in the second person, like you's male, you female, and also the first person, like me male, me female. And you can set up a table like all the different possibilities that you can find in languages. For instance, whether the languages will distinguish gender in the third person, in the second person, and the first, or whether they will just have a third person, and so on and so forth. So you can set up different possibilities. And it turns out that some of these possibilities are never realized. So such a possibility will be to have gender distinctions for the speaker. So me male, me female, and nothing else. So you can imagine this possibility, but this possibility doesn't seem to exist. So this could be universal. This universal was one of those suggested by Greenberg. And here's something you probably, you can see it. There's a very interesting online resource, which is called the Universals Archive in Constance, where people have gathered the proposed universals, a few thousands of those. And this is one of the universals that is there. So the format of this archive is that you have the universal itself, then you say how many languages confirm this universal, what was the basis for this universal, in this case 30 languages, and then whether there are counterexamples. So this is a very good source. You can, if you write down the name, or I can send it to you, you can go there and browse it. It's extremely interesting. Now, so this is what people were into, or they are still into it, some people, when the typology, modern typology was born in the second half of the 20th century. But at the end of the 20th century, the typologists started moving more and more into looking at how the different patterns are distributed across the languages of the world. So people are much more interested into, languages. These patterns are not distributed evenly. So there's some things that you will be found in, let's say, in the African languages, but not elsewhere. Some things will be found, let's say, in the languages of Pakistan or Hindu Kush, not elsewhere. So this is more and more something that people have been doing. And so people ask the typologists, people who are engaged in cross-linguistic research, more and more ask the question, what's, where, why, instead of what's possible, what's universal. And here is another resource, which some of you might know again. It's called, it's found on, I don't have the link, but you can just Google. So it's the World Atlas of Language Structures, or WALS, which is a very wonderful resource where you have more than 140, about 150 different features that people have studied for many, many languages in the world. So this map, which is unfortunately not very clear on the screen, that comes from the chapter by late Anna Shirevska, Professor in Lancaster, who was Dr. Anna's supervisor. And this is just about this phenomenon I mentioned, gender distinctions in independent personal pronouns. So different colors here correspond to different combinations of genders in pronouns. Many languages will not have genders at all. There will be no difference between he and she. Many languages will have just this distinction. And there's only one or two languages per sample which do have distinctions in gender for the first person and nowhere else. So this is an extremely rare pattern, and we are talking about several hundreds of languages that she has been talking about. So this is what typologists do. Now, when you, this is the This cross-linguistic research, typological research, you can do it on all kinds of phenomena. So people are talking about syntactic typology, morphological typology, phonetic typology, phonological typology. And in this world atlas of language structures, most of the features will be grammatical and phonetic. Also, if you look at more or less standard textbooks in typology, most of the discussion will be on grammatical features, on grammar. But you can also conceive of something else, and that is looking at the lexicon. So this is what lexical typology is about. So lexical typology will be the systematic study of cross-linguistic variation in words and vocabularies. There are various definitions of what lexical typology is. So one of the standard definitions is the characteristic ways in which language lexicalizes concepts, that is, packages semantic material into words. And you can look at this from different perspectives. You can start from meanings and look at how meanings are lexicalized. You can also start with expressions. So if you have an expression for something, what meanings will be attributed to this expression? And you can also look at interaction between lexicon and grammar. So if we go back to our example with hands and arms and feet and legs and all that, which seem to be chaotic. Now, there seems to be some systematicity in these patterns, and body belongs to the most well-researched domains in lexical typology. So people have been looking at how different languages carve up the domain of body. So whether you will have different words for foot, leg, and all that. And there are some candidates for generalizations or universals that have been suggested for this domain, already starting from the end of the 70s and 80s. So, for instance, one generalization will be, there will be distinct terms for body, head, arm, eyes, nose, and mouth, meaning that all the languages will have specific word for head, for nose, for body, as opposed to soul, for instance, or as opposed to person. Then another generalization is if both hand and foot are labeled, let's say if they have words, they are labeled differently. So languages normally not have one and the same word for hand and foot. Or if there is a distinct term for foot, then there will be a distinct term for hand. And we could go back to our table. We will see that some of these generalizations do hold. So we see that the languages that neutralize the distinction between hand and arm, it's actually only Russian here. The same language will also neutralize the distinction between foot and leg, but not the other way around. So Romanian does not distinguish between foot and leg. Estonian and Japanese do not do that, but they still have the distinction between hand and arm, right? So this is the way, you set up your generalizations and you try to test them. So these particular generalizations between probably hold, but most of the generalizations that have been suggested for the body part domain do not hold when we look into more languages. So recent research, there has been recent research on the body, primarily directed from the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics in Nijmegen. And these people went to different languages, very often under-described languages, and tried to follow the same scheme for describing the body. And then they discovered that some of the generalizations do not hold at all. So one of the languages, Lavukalere, it's a Papuan language, has one and the same word for both arm and leg, and a special word for foot. And this goes against a couple of these generalizations. Also, body, which was suggested to be a special word in all the languages, does not seem to be that universal, because in many languages will not distinguish body from person, or body from skin, or body from trunk. So, that's the way people do. Okay, so this is just something general, just to give you a flavor of what you can do in lexical typology. And now I'm diving into my collaborative project on how you talk about temperature in different languages. And this, I mean, words like hot, warm, cool, chilly, you know, these kinds of things. What do you do with the temperature domain? How you will carve out this domain? This is slightly more sophisticated than body in a way, because body is, you know, you see it seems to be quite concrete, but how you approach temperature is slightly tricky. So why temperature? What's there with temperature? Now, temperature phenomena are universal. They're relatively easily perceptible by humans, and they're crucial for them. I mean, we know that. But on the other hand, their conceptualization is extremely complex because it involves a complex interplay between external reality, model experience, and evaluation of the relevant properties with regard to their function in the human life in a particular cultural setting. So people, semanticians like Clifford Goddard and Andy Wierzbicka have suggested that if you analyze the semantics of such words as hot and cold, also hard and soft, some others, the semantics is quite complex because that means touching something with a part of the body, feeling something in that part, knowing something about the thing because of it, and thinking about that thing in a certain way because of it. So it's a whole complex of various activities that and we can study, so this domain from different perspectives. We can start by meaning and go to expression. So the questions we can ask is, what temperature concepts are encoded as words across languages? So what distinctions are made in the systems of temperature terms, and what factors underlie them? So this is one way. Another is lexicon-grammar interaction. So we're not only talking about words as they are, but these words participate in different contractions. These words can belong to different parts of speech. So in English you have cold and chilly, these are adjectives, but you also have freeze, which is a verb, or you have scorcher, which is a noun. So what word class affiliation will this word show? And also what contractions do you have in a language? And finally, which is very interesting, we can start with the expression itself. We know that this word means hot. What else can this word express? Or from where does this word come? So these are the questions that have been asked in the project that I have had. And the result of this project is a book which is, well, we've received the first proofs. It's coming in Benjamin's, and it's called The Linguistics of Temperature, which consists of 27 chapters with detailed studies of 50 languages and 3 cross-linguistic chapters. So Henrik, who is sitting there is one of the authors, and you will see quite a few chapters coming from people from Ghanaians. So this is a list of languages. You are not supposed to be able to read it. Well, you should be. My only requirement is that you should be impressed. So here's the map. So all these dots, they are different languages, and what you see here, it's a part of Africa, which you will recognize. So I have, let's say, from Ghana, I have descriptions of 4 languages in this book. So 3 different chapters of 4 different languages, and I will talk about them. Okay, now, so the chapters in this book are devoted to these questions. So how do you carve up this domain, which expressions are used, what constructions are used, where do these words come from, how they develop their other meanings, and so on and so forth. And the interesting question is, of course, I mean, how do you know? How do you know that these people are talking about similar things? You know, with the body, so the project which was carried out on the body, they had this set of stimuli. So people were shown pictures. You know, we have this body, and you have to point to like this and say, what's this? Okay, something like that. You don't do that with temperature, right? So you can think about stimuli. I'll show you a few, like showing pictures to people and trying to get some reactions to this. This is as well as we can do, right? And if you show something like that, you can get whatever. I mean, this is a dog, beer. So this doesn't work very well. You cannot have other kinds of stimuli. I mean, you can't put people in a room and then change the temperature, you know, or you can't make them. I mean, so the ethical committees will have certain problems, you know. So you have to find out something else. And what we did is, there were several different ways of understanding the semantics and covering these domains in various languages. So there were guidelines, very detailed guidelines for what we're talking about, what kinds of interesting distinctions that can be in languages, how approximately you can do to elicit this information. So a lot of information was gathered by elicitation in group discussions. People were using corpora, especially for some of the major languages where you have very many texts, dictionaries. And I should also say that the paradigm case in grammatical typology is that there's one researcher who collects data, let's say on several dozens of languages, or several hundreds of languages. So he or she has informants or experts who provide this information, and I'm the boss, so I write this big chapter, and I thank my contributors at the end. But with lexical typology, this is very difficult, because for grammatical descriptions, very often you have grammars. There's secondary sources you can pull your information from. But for lexical material, this is not doable, because we don't have good lexica for so many languages. Lexica where you should find this level of details. So what I think is, this is my firm persuasion, is that lexical typology is a collective project. It's a joint project. When people knowing their languages, experts in languages, they get together. So each of them writes a chapter. I mean, people discuss this. There's one, like me in this case, I was the spider. So I initiated this, I provided feedback, and there was a lot of feedback going back and forth. But these people are sort of independent researchers. This is their research. And I think this is the only way to do lexical typology. So the people who wrote these chapters were experts. And they paid close attention to various technical situations and to collocational patterns. And they looked at different possibilities. So we were talking about things like both I'm drinking hot tea, and also the tea is hot, so both attribution and predication. Okay, so part of it was financed by a project I was running. Most of the people were not paid, so they just did it. But we have a homepage. The project has a homepage where some of the interesting materials and kits and other things are found. So it's a useful homepage. Okay, so now I'm moving into, I will give you glimpses of what we have been doing and the results we have attained. So if we start by this question of how languages carve up the domain of temperature. When we're talking about sort of carving up a domain, cutting up a domain, we are very often normally we're interested in different dimensions or different parameters which underlie these more possible cutting points. So for the temperature domain, we are talking about three main dimensions or three main parameters that are important for semantics and lexicalization of different temperature terms. These are frames of temperature evaluation, temperature values, and classes of temperature evaluated entities. So if we start with frames of temperature evaluation, that is what exactly is, what are we talking about? So we can experience temperature in various ways. So one is tactile tactile perception. So if I'm drinking this water, I touch it. I'm touching it with my hands, with my tongue, you know. So this is what is meant by tactile temperature. So the stones are hot. I can walk on them, I can touch them. So this is tactile temperatures. I can also talk about ambient temperature. So here it's, well, it is fresh, cool, I don't know. So this is how I experience my ambience. And the third one is my personal feeling temperature. I am feeling hot, I am feeling cool. And if you see, so this is print of temperature evaluation. Temperature values is something that the first thing we think about when we think about temperature, whether it's hot or cold and all that, and how you measure that. There are different scales. You know, people, when we talk about temperature in our languages, we don't measure them. I mean, we are not carrying any scales with us. Okay, warm. Okay, 36. This is warm. 35. Oh, this is, you know, that's not what we do. So we have a kind of subjective temperature, and there are several suggestions on the market on how you can measure this subjective perception. So people into physiology and engineers who construct houses, for instance, they have these different scales for measuring whether houses are sufficiently isolated and all that. So people very often talk about 5 or 7 different degrees, like too hot, painful hot, pleasantly warm, lukewarm, cool, cold, icy, you know, these things. So this will be temperature values. And finally, we have, this is interesting, something that we normally don't think about, you know. Entities themselves that have temperatures, they're very, very different. So entities that surround us, some of them are always hot, like flames, fire. Some are always cold. I don't know if you understand this, this thing. It's a kind of ice. Very beautiful formation, actually. It was cold, so ice on the river or something. It was very cold. Then you have entities that are preferable temperatures, so hot. So coffee will be preferably hot. Beer will be preferably cold. I know this is touchy in Great Britain. When I mention that, say, these are, again, I don't know if you know this, these are mittens, you know, gloves, so they don't have their normal temperature. I mean, who cares whether they are hot or warm or cold? The only thing we're interested in is how they help us to maintain our heat. And some just don't, I mean, some are just irrelevant, right? So the table or the roof or the ceiling, I mean, who cares? So, and this has consequences for how we talk about temperature in different languages, how this domain is carved up. So when we look more and more at these different temperatures, we notice that these 3 parameters, 3 dimensions, interact in various interesting ways. So encoding of one and the same temperature value, let's say cold or hot, may differ if we're talking about ambient temperature or if we're talking about tactile. We can also find different number of distinctions in temperature subsystems which are devoted to talking about these different frames of evaluation or different entities. So I will be talking about that. Just give you a few examples. So if we start by, well, let's start with 1 or 2 examples. For English, the one and the same word, cold, can be used to talk about tactile, ambient, and personal, right? So you can say, I am cold, or I feel cold. It is cold here, and my cheese is cold. One and the same word, and more or less the same construction. You have the option of using freezing or freeze, but you don't have to. But in other languages, there won't be one word for all these 3, but you can have 3 different words. So this is an example from Armenian, which is an Indo-European language spoken in the Caucasus. And this language has 3 different words. So stones are cold, 1 word, it is cold here, another word, and I am cold, a 3rd word. And you can't use them. for the other domain. So this will be a just distinction. Can you still hear me? Okay. Or the language Palula, which Henrik there is working on, will have different words again. So cold, for talking about it was very cold, you will have one word, but the water is cold and this day is cold, you will have another word. So this is not at all infrequent in the languages of the world, that you will have just different words for the different frames evaluation. And the situations can be quite diverse. So what you have in Armenian is that you have 3 different words. In English, you will have 1 word, or optional phrase. In Padula, you will have 2 words. And in Kaman, which is a Papuan language, small language, you also have 2 words, but they have different combinations. So in Padula, you will have one and the same word for ambient and personal, whereas in Kaman, you will have one and the same tactile and ambient and the same. So these are patterns you very often have. And the interesting thing is that now we've been talking about words, so we have different words, right? But some languages will have the same word, but they will use different constructions. So we are in Maison Française, and this is a very appropriate place to mention French, because in French, you will have this, more or less the same word, quoi, different forms, but you will have different constructions. So these terms are called les pièces en quoi. So this is the normal adjective and predication. These terms are called. If you have ambient, il fait quoi, let's see, it does go here, and for personal, je vois, I have go. So you have 3 different constructions. And again, if we combine both constructions and words, you will have something, these representations, I mean, this is very ugly, due to my sort of visual challenge in these things, but this is something which is called semantic maps. You have different domains or subdomains, and by these circles or by whatever, you show whether they have one and the same expression or whether you have different expressions. So if you look at that, you will notice that I put ambient in between. Yeah, these configurations, these geometrical configurations, they support this place. So what we can generalize at this point is that personal feeling temperatures are very often singled out by languages. So for personal feeling, I am cold, or I am hot, I am warm. Languages very often will have special words, whereas for ambient and tactile, we have something common. So this is very common. Also, what you find in many languages is that ambient is sort of in between. In some languages, ambient temperatures will be encoded in the same way as tactile. Encoded meaning that they will have the same word or the same construction. In other languages, ambient will go together with personal feeling temperature. That's what I meant by these circles, that it is in between. Now, what's interesting, when typologists do these things, when we discover patterns, recurrent patterns, we normally don't stop there. We want to explain why. So why is it so? Is there any rationale for this kind of representation? And I think I have an answer, which is that there's something, again, a notion which is used in typology, which is called competing motivations. There can be different reasons for why these two phenomena are similar, and another reason for why these two phenomena are similar. So in this case, I think that this is a combination of 2 competing motivations. So according to one, ambient temperatures are close to tactile. According to the other, they're close to personal feeling. So on the one hand, when we're talking about tactile perception is very different from ambient and personal. Tactile, I just touched it. The other is about my thermal comfort, how I feel in my whole body, how I can breathe and all that. And this is a different physiological mechanism underlying that. So that means that the tactile temperatures will be different in a way from personal feeling and ambient. On the other hand, There's another difference between personal feeling on the one hand and tactile ambient. So tactile and ambient temperatures are more or less objective, right? You can take the scale. So tactile, okay, I put the scale 100 degrees, I put the scale, I can measure. Whereas personal feeling is very subjective. If I say that I am cold, I feel cold, you can't tell me, no, you are lying. I mean, you can do it, right? But you don't have any confirmation because it's me who is feeling, right? So it's very subjective. And that means that they are quite apart. And if we combine, these two competing motivations, that means that some languages will separate all the three, some languages will merge all the three, and some languages will put ambient together with tactile, other will put ambient together with personal feeling. Okay, so here we go. Now, when do you want me to stop? Huh? 10 minutes. Okay? Okay. Now, of course, languages vary very much as to how many terms they will have. And some of these terms are just, they're very frequent. Some of these terms are just marginal. So for a language like English, let's say tepid will be a pretty marginal term, whereas hot will be very common. And when people do descriptions of such domains, very often they talk about basic terms. So we have basic terms and we have more non-basic terms. And basic terms, they will be salient, they will be native, they will be common, all these things. So it has been suggested that, I have to go very, very fast here. It has been suggested that we can use this criteria also for the temperature domain and find basic terms. So the main important factors here will be, well, these are, as I said, salient, generally known. They will be morphologically simple or non-compositional. So warm is okay, warmish is not basic because it's derived. And then they won't be too restricted in the application. So, like, what do you say? Do you say room temperature? No, tempered, right? Tempered. Yes, that's too specific. And it has further been suggested that if you look at these basic terms, languages will have very restricted systems. So there will be languages with 2 terms, basic terms, 3 and 4. So 2 will be warm and cold, 3 will be warm, pleasant, cold, unpleasant, and hot, unpleasant, and 4 will be warm, cold, hot, lukewarm. Now, the results of our project show that this is not completely true. So the truth is much more complicated. And what we find is that, surprisingly, perhaps not for you, but for us people coming from Europe, surprisingly, it turns out that the cross-linguistically most common temperature systems just build on this binary opposition cold and hot. That's it. And there are various variations here. So one variation is whether these terms, we will have just the same term for everything, one cold, one hot, or you will have different. And whether this will be something which is general for the whole temperature system, or whether the different subparts of the system will show more distinctions than that. And I will show just a few examples, because this is quite interesting. So, okay, so you see one language here, oceanic, hot, warm, all the way, then another language, hot, one word, and then cold, different. We've seen this. Felix Ameca, who has one of the chapters in the book, it's on Lickberg on Ewe. He suggests that Ewe, in fact, has only one basic temperature term for cold, because for hot, you will use such expressions as to get, catch fire, which are transparent. I mean, they're compositional. So this is one way of approaching that. I mean, if you understand that this is completely compositional, whether it's a basic term or not. So this suggests that there may be systems with just one basic term. And this pattern is not only restricted to Ewe, you find it in quite a few other languages. So Bayo, which is spoken in the Central African Republic, the same. Now, the interesting thing is that linguistic systems are very, very often heterogeneous. So it's not like you have the same distinction all over across the whole system, but you will find different subsystems. So you will have different subsystems for different frames of evaluation, and you will have different subsystems for different entities. And that's where I'm coming. So the first example is, again, Henrik has to excuse me, although this is a very good language. So what we find here is that for tactile and personal feeling temperatures, you have just the binary opposition. They express in slightly different ways. But the only thing you have is hot, warm, and cold, cool. Whereas for ambient, you will have an additional distinction between cold and cool. So it will have three members. And this is something you find in language after language. This is Georgian, it can be spoken with the Caucasus, where you have four distinctions for tactile and ambient, but for personal, you don't have either warm or cool. The only thing you have is I'm feeling hot, I'm feeling cold. Nothing else exists. So, and this is the pattern which is repeated from language to language. If we look at the number of temperature value oppositions, we can set up an hierarchy. So personal feeling temperatures will very often be restricted. The only thing you're bothered about is whether you're feeling hot or whether you're feeling cold. If you're feeling, we talk quite a lot about feeling warm, in our climate. But for most other languages, that's not the issue. You are not talking about feeling warm. You say, well, I'm fine, right? So what you are interested in is whether the extremes, whether it's deviation from the norm. For tactile, you can have a sort of more elaborate system of distinctions. And for ambient, you may have very many different words, because there you will have all these things, whether it's windy and sunny and the scorcher, So this is the kind of hierarchy. Tactile will be sort of more basic, the more basic thing. And also, what you find is that different entities themselves can have different elaborated systems. So if you have sun and fire, of course sun and fire, they can't be cold. They can be hot and very, very hot. So many languages will have specific dedicated words for talking about these very, very high temperatures. For human beings, you can have several specific terms, and the most interesting thing here is water. So water, very often, we have special, many more distinctions in how we talk about the temperature of water than what you talk in other cases. So why is it so? Well, water has a very specific status for us humans, from the anthropocentric point of view, because water occurs in very many different conditions, and it is being used for different purposes with different temperature properties. And also water clearly manifests its extreme temperature values. So if it's very hot, it will evaporate, so you will see vapor. If it's very cold, it freezes. And in fact, language after language show that when you talk about water, this will be a very elaborate system of temperature oppositions. So you can have, let's say, many languages will have a neutral word like lukewarm, tepid, just for water or for liquids. And many languages will have extreme temperature values just for water or for liquids. And again, example from Erwin here, which Felix Amieka argues has 5 different degrees of temperature distinctions if we're talking about water, whereas normally we'll just distinguish between hot and cold. And he connects this to the different plexuses which are medicinal purposes, bathing babies and all that. And this is the pattern which it's a very beautiful example, but this is a pattern we see from language development. So if we just wrap up this, we can say that this basic term issue doesn't work very well for temperatures for different reasons, because sometimes you have this compositionality can be an issue. Very often you just don't have a term which goes through all, which applies to everything, all the frame, all the entity some kind of, you know, systems. This is the word. Central terms and central oppositions for the system, where you have some oppositions that go through all the frames and all the entities, and you just don't talk about these very specific things like water or sun. And what we find is, well, the most common system will be where you just oppose cold, cool, and warm, hot. Then you have occasionally 3 values, then you have 4 values, cold, cool, warm, hot. Might happen that we can say that, well, some languages just have one dedicated temperature value, cold, cool, and nothing else. And this lukewarm, which has been suggested as the possibility for 4 value systems, doesn't work because lukewarm is always restricted. Okay, so this is, may I have just a couple of minutes? Yeah. Okay, so we can make a few conclusions about this part. I think I can come back to that because you've heard this. I want to say a few words about this other part of the project, that is from expression to meaning. So from where temperature terms come and what extended meanings they can develop. This is a very, very interesting issue. And what we notice from language to language is that there are some recurrent sources for temperature words. So some of the usual suspects will be, for hot you will have burn, fire, oil, cook, For cold you will have ice, winter, shade, or brr. I always wonder where your Africans get your cold words, because you don't have ice, you don't have winter, so but shade, the brr will be a good thing. Then temperature concepts are, of course, very often used for talking about emotions, hot temperament, warm feelings, and for referring to other perceptual modalities, hot, spices. But there are many other interesting sources for, and many interesting extensions of temperature words. So there have been a few suggestions for universal extended meanings of temperature. So those of you who know cognitive linguistics know that one of the most widely quoted metaphors will be affection is warm. So it's an allegedly universal metaphor, or anger is heat. So this should be found in all the languages. And also cross-modal perception, so hot kettle and hot pepper, because it gives rise to very similar reactions. However, it turns out, this is a very interesting result, that these extended meanings, uses of temperature, are not at all as universal as people have thought about them. So for many languages, we just don't find any extended uses of temperature at all. For oceanic languages and Australian languages, especially for Australian languages, nothing. They never talk about, hot feelings or whatever. Piraha in Brazil, hoop, which is another language spoken in the Amazon, Mapudungun, again spoken